Okay, welcome everyone. This is one of the first times I haven't had to sing to get the room to be quiet. That's great. So welcome. For those of you who I don't know, my name's Rabbi Aliza. I'm the rabbi here at HPT, and welcome to our sanctuary. Really happy to have you. Just a big welcome to all of our members, all members from Dorshei Tzedek. Thank you for co-sponsoring this event. And anyone who's new to either of those communities, welcome. Really happy to have you here. And Yoav, welcome to you. Welcome to Boston. And thanks for being here as the start, right? You were telling me this is the start of several events on a tour. So we're very honored to be the first one. And thanks for coming to Boston to be here with us. It's really, really an honor to have you.
Yeah,
so
my honor.
Welcome. And just for you, Yoav, and for everyone in the room who is not an HBT member, because I see some new faces here, just want to say just a few sentences about HBT and who we are and how we're trying to navigate in this political time and what we're doing. And then you'll hear some more also. But so we're a Reconstructionist community, and important to the Reconstructionist movement, and certainly important to us, is being able to really talk and listen and learn and be in relationship and be in wrestling about complex and hard issues, and not avoid and go into our silos, but actually be together and in relationship and wrestling and talking and learning. And that's something that's really important to us at HBT. So we've had throughout the past year plus several community conversations about Israel, Gaza, the West Bank, about anti-Semitism, where we're learning, practicing, and also learning sometimes new just skills for something that is so hard in our time, which should be easy, but it's not, but just listening with safety and being able to express and listen and be together through talking about this. And Yoav, I know we were just talking in my office, like you being a natural bridge builder, and we were just talking about the importance of that. And so that just feels like it fits so well into what we're trying to do here at HBT. So just, again, really honored to have you here. And just a huge thank you to the IPPC, who we're going to hear more about in a second from Lenny, but who really put this event together in the past 2.5 weeks. So thank you. And Debra, thank you to the connection to Yoav. So I'm very, very honored, and I'm happy to pass it to you and to Lenny. Just to Lenny? Mainly to Lenny and also to Debra to further introduce the evening. Okay, great. Good. So Lenny, I will pass the mic to you. And again, Yoav, thank you so much for being here. And thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Rabbi. Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to Temple Hillel B'nai Torah. We're really glad to have you here tonight, and our friends from Dorshei Tzedek, who are co-sponsoring this event. So thank you for that. And this is as part of, especially with Congregation Dorshei Tzedek, we're part of the greater Boston Jewish community, and this event is part of that. Well, now that you're all settled into into the quiet of our sanctuary, this space is really for listening, for learning, for reflection. You know, tonight's program is the work of the Israeli-Palestinian Program Committee at HBT. And we came together because there was a deep need for open values-based conversation within our community. We're a group of HBT members committed to engaging with the realities of Israel and Palestine in a way that is grounded in Jewish values and Reconstructionist principles. Now, even our name, the Israeli-Palestinian Program Committee, it reflects that intention to humanize this the crisis and not to politicize it. The committee is co-chaired by Flashman and Keren Sammett, and founding members Rachel Schaap, Jonathan Magaziner, Beth Reisen, Nechama Katz, Debra Kaufman, and me, Lenny Markowitz. Our work centers on listening, learning, and connection. So we aim to hold space for honest and respectful dialogue. It's not to simplify what's happening, but it's to navigate all these complexities together as a community. Now, some of our most meaningful programs that we've had here have come from programs where people can speak honestly, ask questions, and feel safe in our congregation for doing so. We hope that our future programs will continue to resonate with the community in this way. Now, I want to say clearly that tonight is not a training, a debate, or a political panel. It's certainly not a talk from a politician or a pundit, but this is a human conversation grounded in courage and compassion, hard-earned hope that only comes from living inside the story. It's a chance to hear from someone who has witnessed and is witnessing the conflict up close and still chooses to stay human. Because אנחנו עדיין בתוך הסיפור, we are still inside the story. Anyway, now some quick notes. Before we continue, tonight's program is being recorded, but any audience members who are visible on camera will be blurred out in post-production. That's my job. This evening's talk is free and open to all, and we hope you'll consider making a donation to support this and other programs at HBT. You can use our QR codes or our very old-fashioned tip jar on your way out. Also, if you're interested in learning more about the IPPC committee here or getting involved in future programs, feel free to talk to me or one of our committee members after the event. And now, I am honored to hand the mic over to Debra, who is going to do the formal introduction. Shalom. How's that?
At last. Huh? Okay.
Thank you.
Because I believe this is a unique evening, I'm not going to do an introduction. For instance, I am not going to tell you that Yoav Peck. Closer? Closer?
Pointed at your
All right.
pointed at your mouth.
Pointed at my mouth. Oh, wow. All these mavens. Okay. So I'm not going to do the usual introduction. For instance, I'm not going to tell you that Yoav Peck was born in New York City, educated at Berkeley during the People's Park years, and that he has been a citizen of Israel for over 50 years. Or that he has been active as an organizer in the Israeli peace movement since 1978. Or that he is an organizational psychologist who conducts programs in the public sector for the advancement of human dignity. Or that he leads a Beyond Persuasion workshop for activists to equip them with tools for speaking with hostile adversaries. Or that he holds leadership roles in Israeli civil efforts that aim to build connection and accountability across divides. Or that he writes a blog, Journalism Heart. But what I do want to share with you is that what I've come to understand that Yoav is a man with deep convictions and deep commitments. He's a gifted writer and a talented professional organizer because he is so much a people person. The reform movement brought him back from Israel for several years to be a shaliach for them. He was not just an athlete, but a New York City marathon runner. One who sported in the 1980s, I don't know if that's true, or the 1990s, a t-shirt that read, "Israel is real." Despite the seriousness with which he takes his responsibility, he has a great sense of humor. As a bass player in his Berkeley years, he was part of a band he organized called One Hand Clapping. When I sent him a draft copy of the publicity for tonight for his approval, he wrote back saying, "If I were not busy that evening, I would be sure to attend the talk myself." Please welcome Yoav Peck.
No, I've got this one. Yeah, fancy technology. Thank you, Debra, and thank you, Rabbi and Lenny, and just wonderful to be here and really looking forward to talking with you. My love affair with Israel began in 1972. I was a Berkeley activist against the war in Vietnam and living in a commune in Berkeley and doing all the Berkeley things. And my friends were marching, my Jewish friends were marching in pro-Palestinian demonstrations. And I was uncomfortable because I did not know enough about Israel and Palestine to join them. I didn't know what to think. So I figured it was time to get myself to Israel, and I had an opportunity. I gave myself 2 weeks to figure out the Middle East, and I'm still working on it. But basically what happened is that to my great surprise, I had already identified myself as a Berkeley leftist who would continue there. I would continue my studies in psychology, and I would dig in America. And it was all rattled when I got to Israel, and my mother's 80-something-year-old Uncle Israel, didn't speak much English, but when I told him I was planning to go back to Berkeley, he grabbed my hand and he said, "This is your home. What's Berkeley, California? You crazy?" And at first I said to myself, who do you think you are? I have a right to live wherever I want to live. And then it sort of began to grow on me. And I realized that it was really just a mistake of history or a fluke of history that I was the grandson of one of the surviving members of my extended family in Lithuania. And just by chance, my grandmother got to New York and not to Israel like her brother, Yisrael. And then I began to feel wanted. And wherever I went, people said, "You must come here. This is where you belong." And I was hitchhiking in a right-wing, one of the cronies of Menachem Begin picked me up, and within 5 minutes, we were in a political argument. And as I got out of the car, the thing was that it was warm in the car, even though we were arguing. And he grabbed my hand and he said, "I don't care if you're a communist. Come here and be a communist and we'll continue this argument." And I just began to feel like I belonged. And decided to stay on a kibbutz and live there for 6 months, and just began to feel very much at home. And the rest is history. My first wife and I decided to make Aliyah. My son was born in the absorption center. We arrived back in Israel after making a little money in the States. We came back to Israel just after the Yom Kippur War. The day after my son was born, someone said, "A boy or a girl?" I said, "A boy." She said, "Oh, another soldier." I said, "I haven't diapered my son yet, and you've already got him in uniform." And the weight of living in Israel began to impress itself upon me. But from year to year, I just felt more and more a part of things. And now I speak Hebrew with my American accent, but I really feel at home in Israel. During that first visit, though, those were days when you could get on a bus and go to Gaza. So I got on a bus in Jerusalem and went to Gaza, downtown Gaza. And I got off the bus and there were Israeli soldiers there. It was after the Six-Day War and we were occupying Gaza. And I found a couple of teenagers and I said, "Could you show me around?" And they were great. They took me into a refugee camp, Shatta refugee camp. And I began to see what occupation looks like. And so there I was. I drank too much coffee and I climbed up into the water tower at Kibbutz Yad Mordechai with a statue of Mordechai Yanilevich, who was one of the leaders of the Warsaw Rebellion during the Holocaust, and was just torn up. And I realized I couldn't go back to the States feeling as strongly as I did and wanting to know more. So I stayed, and eventually I joined the kibbutz and as a member, and did my army service, which was shortened because my son was already born, but just became an Israeli. And I love the place. I love so much about it. Mostly, I love the people. And, you know, in those first weeks, I went to the shuk to the market I bought some plums and I forgot to pay for them. It was just sort of kabloojied, and I started walking away with my plums, and then I realized I had not paid. So I went back. I said, I forgot to pay you. So he started shouting at me. I said, why are you shouting at me? I'm back. I'm paying you. I made a mistake. He said, Moses made a mistake too, and look what happened to him. So I began to get that everything is steeped in our tradition, and it just felt right. So, to make a long story short, you read the news. I'm not going to tell you what you can read in the newspaper. So, what am I after with you guys? What is it that I would like to see happen? Let me ask you a question. Have you been having difficult conversations about Israel in the last couple of years? Are there people that you avoid politics with, or you avoid Israel in your conversation? I mean, and I'm seeing the heads going, and you know, it's so I would like to sharpen some of the issues and to invite you not to avoid those difficult conversations. I think that communication breaks down not because you can't talk about these issues, but because we don't have the tools for it. And there are some very simple tools. I don't know, do we have those pages printed up about? Oh, no, that's fine. Debra's kind enough to print up some pages with some of the tips that we share with people in a workshop that I call Beyond Persuasion, because persuasion doesn't work. In Hebrew, to say lishachnea, to persuade someone, is from the same root as the word to surrender, to cause someone to surrender. And no one wants to surrender. And the fantasy that we all might carry, which is that I will say something so clever and so piercing that the guy will drop to his knees with tears in his eyes and will say, how right you are and how wrong I've been. It doesn't happen that way, but it does happen. People shift their ways of thinking about things when they have the space and they have the time and they have the encouragement to think things through on their own. And one of the wonderful things about this new period, 4 weeks after the ceasefire agreement, is that maybe we are going to get the space in Israel-Palestine to start thinking things through and to start processing what we've been doing. I mean, we have been holding the door against terror, literally, in those kibbutzim, where the reason people survived is that they were able to wrap their belt around the doorknob and keep. We have been holding that door for 2 years, and the tension has been enormous. In fact, we've been holding that door for 3 years, because 9 months before the war broke out, the Netanyahu government launched their assault on the judicial system. And we were at demonstrations all the time leading up to the war. And many of the pundits believed that Hamas took advantage of the tumult in Israel, that we were weak because we were busy with this crazy attempt to disempower the Supreme Court and the Attorney General, etc. And, you know, I'm always laughing about the fact that I haven't been to the movies on a Saturday night in 3 years, because every Saturday night there's a demonstration, and I wouldn't feel right in a movie theater. So that's my goal in life, is to feel okay about going to a movie on a Saturday night. But there's this struggle going on, and finally we have a moment which hopefully is going to hold on, is going to maintain itself and will be able to move forward. But as I began to say, we will pause for questions, and the things that are troubling you is what I'd like to hear, and I think others would like to hear, and I'll respond, but I'll carry on now for a while. And my goal is to give you some direction in thinking through this morass. So we hear all the time, Israel did this and Israel did that. Who's Israel? Who are we talking about when we say Israel did this and Israel did that? Are we talking about the government? Are we talking about the army? Are we talking about the 30% of the population who support Bibi Netanyahu? Are we talking about 170 civil society organizations that are working for freedom and justice in Israel and Palestine? If you are willing to face the challenge of looking at complexity, of looking at nuance, and not looking for the black and white answers. When people ask me, are you with Israel? Which side are you on? My response is, I'm on both sides. Until the Palestinians are safe and secure, Israelis will not be safe and secure. As long as Israelis are not safe and secure, Palestinians will not be safe and secure. It's one system. And we are going to have to find our way to cooperation. There are people who call themselves liberal in Israel who want to give the Palestinians a state, but to build a huge wall so that there's absolute separation. But how do you build a wall against a pandemic? How do you build a wall over the water table? How do you handle pollution with a wall? Cooperation is inevitable. And the question is, how long are we going to resist it? And are we going to be willing to move forward into it? And yet we have this moment of hope. Hope. I was in Northern Ireland a few months ago. In Northern Ireland, they killed each other for 800 years, and particularly in the Troubles for 30 years. In the 60s and in the 70s, in the 80s, they killed each other until they stopped. And I said to one of the people who was hosting me, how did you get to the Good Friday agreements? He said, we got tired of killing each other. And aren't we tired of killing each other in Israel-Palestine? And what's happening, it's not that they had a peace agreement in 1998, the Good Friday agreements, and everything's fine. For 27 years, they've been working on clearing up the stereotypes and the hatred and the resentment and healing the scars. There's so much work to be done after the ceasefire. And may we pray that this is the time when Israel can get on top of those issues. So I do have to represent the situation as it was. For the last 6 months, there have been 48 hostages, 28 bodies of hostages and 20 people alive. Most of them have come home now. But 48 hostages in American terms is 1,630 Americans being taken hostage. And when Trump came to Israel and saw 400,000 or 500,000 people in the streets supporting a ceasefire, so 500,000 Israelis in the streets is like 17 million Americans being in the streets. I mean, this has gripped all of us. And it's mostly out of this weariness with this hopeless war that increasingly people understood is really there to serve the political interests of our prime minister and his government. And I love Israel, and I'm opposed to the government, and I demonstrate against the government, and it's legitimate. I'll be speaking for J Street, where their position is basically you can love Israel and critique the government, and it's fine. So does it make any difference that we demonstrate? Sometimes we look at each other on a Saturday night. We know that Netanyahu and his government are ignoring the people in the street, and we'd say, does it really make any difference? Well, Trump said it made a difference. Trump, when he came into Israel, mentioned that it made a difference. But even more than that, I love the story of A.J. Must, M-U-S-T-E, the guy who sat in front of the White House night after night during the Vietnam War. And finally, a reporter came up and said, you really think you're going to end the war? You're going to change something by sitting here every night protesting the war? He said, oh, I don't do this to change the country. I do this so the country won't change me. And, you know, we look around at the demonstrations at each other, and what we see are the faces of the people whose values are similar to ours, and it fills our batteries. It keeps us going. So even if we hadn't had any impact, and I think we did, especially so does Trump think we did, just the refueling of the resistance of each other. We've paid a terrible price. Collective trauma is rampant in Israel. 900 soldiers and thousands are dead, and thousands of soldiers are wounded. And the media is playing a terrible role because they're keeping alive the trauma. What sells media, what sells newspaper and radio is disastrous, dramatic stories. So 2 years after the attack on October 7th, you can still be in your car and turn on the radio, and there's another person. I was hiding in the closet, and the 2 kids were in the other closet. And it's 2 years already. Why are we still feeding the flames of this resentment, of this horror, if it's not just to sell newspapers? And even more so, it's first of all, it's re-traumatizing. But the other sin of the media is that they have abetted the attempt to ignore what's happening to the Palestinians in Gaza. And you know, if you have a value, if you have the value of the sanctity of human life, a value is applicable to everyone. It's not like I respect human life for the people I like. It's that I respect human life for everyone. You can't have it, you know. And during the democracy struggle before the war, I would shout at my fellow demonstrators, we cannot demand democracy and save democracy in Israel at the same time that we're occupying 4 million Palestinians and depriving them of all of their most basic rights. How do you square that with yourself? There has to be some consistency here. And ignoring the suffering of the Palestinians. And I do need to, just so we know what we're talking about, 67,000 people, at least, are dead. Another few thousand are hidden under the rubble. 92% of the homes in Gaza have been destroyed. 50 million metric tons of toxic rubble. 1.9 million displaced Palestinians. And these are, I mean, I can give the references for the statistics. 518 schools damaged or destroyed. All 12 universities destroyed. Why would we destroy universities? And someone will say, well, the Hamas had tunnels underneath them. When is it justified to deliberately go after the culture of a people? 790 attacks on doctors and healthcare facilities. You know, we have to wake up and acknowledge. And once I was at a presentation by the granddaughter of someone who was killed in one of the massacres during the Independence War. And after she made a presentation, she said, I don't want you to do, it was a Jewish audience. She said, I don't want you to do anything except one thing, acknowledge that this happened. I want to hear you acknowledge that this happened, to validate my experience and my mother's experience of what happened. So it's not as though my house in Jerusalem is built on the ruins of an Arab village. And I sleep at night. You know, there are realities about Israel coming, the Jews coming to Israel in the last 100 years that even the Palestinians have made their peace with. None of my Palestinian friends expect me to move because there was once an Arab village under the house that I live in. What they want is the 67 borders. They want us to leave Gaza. They want us to leave the West Bank. They want us to stop oppressing them in those parts of what remains of Palestine. 22% of the original Palestine is what they're asking for. And there is a way, there are some wonderful, new, adventurous, innovative ideas about how we can do the two-state solution in a creative way, in a way that doesn't create more bedlam. And if you pick up the page on your way out that is on the table outside, I've given some of the links to the organizations that are coming up with some of these solutions and are resisting the oppression. But when you think about what's happened to Israel, 300,000 reservists have been serving. People have been doing 400, 500 days of reserve duty over the last 2 years. Their children don't know them. They come home, their wives don't know what to do with them. And they themselves feel so close to the guys they've been running in the alleys of Gaza. They feel closer to them than they do to their own families. And they're traumatized. And while they were running through the streets of Gaza, they didn't have time, they didn't have energy to even think about the fact that they were doing Netanyahu's bidding. But when they get home and they have some time, they begin to read the articles and to think about what it was that they were doing. And that is where moral injury lives. The split between your beliefs and what you've done. And these guys are carrying the weight of that moral fracture. And the number of suicide attempts among newly released soldiers has spiked. Suicide attempts and successful, quote unquote, suicides. We're in trouble. And we have much, much healing to do. The country rallied amazingly after the attack on October 7th. The government was paralyzed, but volunteers came out of the woodwork and people were doing so much. My wife, there were evacuees from the northern towns after the Hezbollah joined the war from Lebanon, evacuees who filled a hotel in our neighborhood, very close. And there were 2 washing machines there and every room in the hotel was booked. So there was a need for people to do the laundry of these evacuees. My wife got on WhatsApp and in 3 hours, she had 56 volunteers saying, we will do their laundry. And every Tuesday and Thursday, we would go to the lobby of this hotel and pick up sacks of laundry and bring it back in the evening. And, you know, Israel is amazing in a crisis. I always ask myself, why can't we be this good to each other when there's no crisis? But it is heartening. One of the most disturbing aspects of what's happened, you know, it's been ever since Ben Gurion, there's been an agreement with the ultra-Orthodox that they can have exemptions from the army if they're studying Torah. And people have lived with that. But now, with 900 soldiers killed, and all these wounded soldiers, and people's businesses falling apart because they're in the reserves, excuse me, people are deeply resentful. And I was standing online with an ultra-Orthodox guy at the bank, and I said, you know, people are really angry about you guys not serving in the army. He said, we serve. You serve by protecting our bodies. We serve by protecting your souls. Sorry, it don't float. So we live with that, and the conflict has gotten intense. We'll see what becomes of it. Netanyahu is entirely dependent at this point on the Americans. I have a friend who's been negotiating, who's been in contact with the Hamas. He said, I used to be in touch in bridging between the Hamas and the Israeli government. Now I'm bridging between the Hamas and the American government. After the ceasefire, we had a parade of American babysitters, they call them, sweep into the country. First Kushner and Witkoff, then Vance, all in the course of 10 days. Then Rubio showed up, and they invited themselves to cabinet meetings. They invited themselves to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I mean, it feels like the 51st state. And if the purpose weren't to advance this ceasefire, I'd be up in arms. But, you know, if it takes a bully like Trump and his deal-making cronies to make this shift, I'll take all the help I'll take help from wherever it comes. So there's some great things about this. First of all, it's good news that the Palestinian issue is back on the table. It's not good news that they did what they did, the Hamas, but Israel had successfully sort of pushed the Palestinian issue off the table, and they did what was called managing the conflict, as though you could manage the oppression of 4 million people indefinitely. And you can't. So that bubble burst, and we were living in a fool's paradise, and now we can't. The Palestinian issue will have to be handled. We want to open relations with Saudi Arabia, great. The Saudis are insisting on advancing the process of moving towards an independent Palestinian state. We are going to have to confront this. And the Netanyahu government will not do that. Elections, the latest they could be is next October, and hopefully they'll be earlier. We need to change our leadership. The Palestinians need to change their leadership. Abu Mazen is just not up to the task anymore. He's in his late 80s, and or has it reached 90? I'm not sure, but he's very unpopular. But now that we have this space, we can begin asking these deeper questions about where we're headed and what kind of future do we see and what's possible and what scenarios can we cook up in order to move forward. And the other thing is that we are vulnerable, and that's good news. There was always this sense after the Holocaust that what we had to do as Jews is to be strong. And that strength is what has, on the one hand, protected us, and on the other hand, has made us impermeable, has made us so resistant to yielding that it's not in our interest any longer. So being vulnerable, there's a psychologist from California passed on, but he used to talk about the power of vulnerability. There is a power in acknowledging that we have our trust that we will be safe has broken. And we can either panic from that, or we can say, broken trust, what are those, it's the Japanese who have made an art form of broken ceramics. I mean, the wounded warrior, that to move towards accepting our vulnerability and working with it. Making what vulnerability does is make us less threatening to the Palestinians. I was at a listening circle with a young Palestinian guy in his late 20s, and at the end of the listening circle, he said to me, you know, you're the first Jew that I haven't been afraid of. It's not in our interest for them to be afraid of us, because fear brings fury, and safety brings the possibility of negotiation. And I always ask myself, why are we so afraid of negotiation? And my answer is that negotiation is intimate. To negotiate with someone, to say, I don't like what you said, but maybe we could talk, that's soft. That's intimate stuff. That's close. And the machismo of the Israeli man, as a generalization, would rather be in 100 battles than sit at a table with someone. But if you ever get your hands on a film called The Oslo Diaries, there is a beautiful depiction of what happened there. What happened in Oslo, doesn't matter if you think it was a good agreement or bad agreement, it was a process of these 10 or 12 men sitting around a table for months, back and forth, back to their bosses, then back to Oslo, talking so much, talking and screaming and crying and raging and walking out, and then coming back, led to the climax, which was they all said Kiddush together on a Friday night in Oslo. And some of them became fast friends. Intimacy, negotiation, that is where there's light shining, and that's where we need to go. As Ayman Odeh, the Palestinian member of Congress of Knesset, said, instead of fearing war, we should fear life without peace. And, you know, that's where we are. I don't know if I'll see peace in my time, but my job in life is to create the conditions whereby my grandchildren, my children, leave their American passports in the dresser drawer and decide that Israel is a place that they want to live. And at this point, it is a place they want to live, but who knows? I have friends who are looking for property. Some friends have bought property in Italy and in Cyprus because they can. But we are in it for the long haul. And I come back to you and I say, have those conversations. Have those difficult conversations with the people that are so hard to talk to, and find out what it is that makes people so frightened that they're not willing to look for possible solutions. And I do a workshop with activists that we call Beyond Persuasion. And it has to do with, and also on the pages outside, there are some of the tips. It has to do with listening. First of all, God gave us a subtle hint, 2 ears and 1 mouth. And you would hope that we would learn to listen twice as much as we speak. People really think that in a discussion, the only issue is, what am I going to say next? And it's not what are you going to say next? It's how good a listener can you be? I mean, if you're selling dresses, you want to know what people want in a dress. So you ask them, you do market research. If you want to have a discussion that's productive about peace in the Middle East, you ask people what they're worried about. You ask questions. And if they say something insulting, you make a decision in advance. We call it the umbrella. Psychologically, you put up an umbrella so that when they say something abusive, it's like rain on the umbrella. It doesn't touch you because you've decided you're not going to get triggered. You're not going to give up control over this conversation by getting yourself triggered. I had in one of these discussions downtown Jerusalem, someone said to me, it's too bad you didn't die in Auschwitz with the rest of your family. Now, in normal circumstances, I would either walk away or get into a fight. But I had my umbrella on, and I just looked at him and I said, you have to be really angry to say something like that to a fellow Jew. And he apologized. And then the conversation continued. So there are tools, and it has to do with listening, and it has to do with refusal to get activated. And it has to do what we call friendly undermining. So you maintain a dignified and friendly atmosphere with people, and then you undermine the assumptions that their points are based on, but not as an attack. You help them to see the inconsistency in what they're saying. Friendly undermining. And it works. You know, someone who's screaming at me 20 minutes later is taking my business card and shaking my hand. And he didn't drop to his knees and say how right you are, but one step at a time, a gradual peace. And I was telling the rabbi about one of the people in my workshop who turned me on to what the Kotzker rabbi said in the early 18th century. He said he noticed that in the Shema we say, "V'hayu advarim ha'ele asher anochi mitzavcha hayom al levavcha." Take to heart these instructions which I charge you this day. And in Hebrew, it's not take to heart, it's have it on your heart. And the Kotzker rabbi asked, why on your heart and not in your heart? And he explained that people will take the truth into their heart when they're ready. And so you lay the truth on their heart. And when their heart is ready to open, it will come in. And those are the kinds of empathic conversations that you don't need a college degree to conduct. You just need to take a deep breath and think about some of these principles and carry on. And it's possible. So let's see if there's something critical. I want to read to you just one quote. Here is Galit Dan, who lost her daughter Noya and her mother Carmela Dan on October 7th in the attack. And this is what she said at the 2-year memorial. She said, "We don't seek revenge. We want mending. We want to defeat hate and reconnect to a sense of humaneness, to vanquish rage and reconnect to compassion, to reawaken values." And I think I will stop there with that quote and see if you have some issues or questions, but I appreciate your listening. Thank you.
What we're going to do is we're going to put 2 microphones, one here and one in the back. And if you have questions, come up to the microphones, line up, as it were, and we'll take one by one. Again, this isn't a time for political discussions. This is a time for talking about, from your heart, about what it is you feel. And a question ends with a question mark.
We're going to make a slight change based on your recommendation. One microphone, and we're just going to line right up here, and we'll manage it that way instead of 2. We don't really need 2 microphones.
Take a number.
Hi. I have a question. I was intrigued by the phrase you used, which I think it was something like friendly undermining or quiet undermining. Or what was the phrase?
Friendly undermining.
Right, friendly undermining. mining, and I'd love to hear an example of what that might look like. It makes perfect sense to me, but it's hard to just imagine doing it without actually, hearing an example of some dialogue or something like that.
Yeah, thank you. Bill.
Yeah.
If someone says to you, the whole world hates the Jews,
Yeah.
and if we don't keep a strong defense, we will be taken advantage of, and we will be unsafe. So we must be strong, forever strong, and someone states that as though it's a fact.
Yeah.
So if I were going to engage in friendly undermining, I would say, what is it that brings you to the conclusion that everyone hates us in every situation? Where do you see that? Could you enumerate where you have gotten the proof for the position, the assertion that everyone hates us? And when I would talk to him about the way that Germany came around after the Second World War, I would look for ways of demonstrating that his assertion, so maybe then he'll move to, well, maybe not everyone, but most people would like to kill us. And then I might ask him, how does that serve you? And what future do you see with that position? Where will that lead us?
Yeah.
Can you just help me understand how it is that you see a future where all you can see is how dangerous everything is and how dangerous everyone is? Where will that take us in the future? And I might remind him that our prime minister said, Israel will live forever by the sword. Is that what you want? And I wouldn't say you're wrong, but I would ask him the questions that might bring him to question his own assumptions.
Yeah.
Just as an example.
That's super helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, and it's none of us is an expert. We're all learning the art of talking to someone who is frightened or aggressive or and it's an ongoing process.
That's great. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yoav, thank you. That was a talk from the heart, from within the heart. We appreciate it. I'm a reader of your blog, courtesy of your sister. And it's been very helpful to understand a voice of many people that we don't have access to through you. So that's very nice. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
What would you say are the prerequisites or the steps you'd like to have taken in order to bring back together the Israelis and the Palestinians who used to be on speaking terms, who used to see the humanity in each other, but because of this conflict are not permitted to do so anymore? What do you think it will take to bring that spirit and atmosphere back?
I love the question. The way I see it, it's top down and bottom up. We have to look at the political realities. As long as the Israeli occupation of the West Bank and Gaza continues, people who have a boot on their neck are not dialogue partners. And so we have to find a way to both protect ourselves, and I served in the army. I believe we need an army that will protect us until it's safe. So we need to make it possible for people to feel safe on both sides. And from the bottom up, there are, on the page that I left for you all, about 10 organizations that are doing this work, that are doing the work of bringing Palestinians and Israelis together to talk about fear. One of our most recent Palestinian-Israeli gatherings in an organization that I used to be director of, Sulha, it's called, is we asked people to talk about fear in their lives. And fear for a Palestinian living under occupation is different from fear for someone who lives in downtown Tel Aviv. But fear is fear, and people are people. So that the Israelis experiencing a Palestinian listening attentively to them talking about their fears, and the opposite, that's where the groundwork for rebuilding trust would come from. But it will also come from those political decisions about how we are going to distribute land and what's going to be with the settlements in the West Bank, and holding people without trial, and all of the abuses that occupation leads to. That stuff has to be corrected, and I pray that we're going to have a strong enough campaign that Netanyahu and his gang will be history, and a justice-minded government will begin to move us towards those conditions.
So what I hear you saying is that without the political space, you don't feel that it's possible to recreate the human relationships because people will not feel safe to conduct those relationships.
It has to happen simultaneously. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. Did you know that from your lips to God's ear is also an expression in Arabic? Tummak lebabil sama. You can say it in any language, but when people hear what they want to hear, that's what they say. Yeah.
Thank you, Yoav, for what you've shared tonight. One of the things that I've found most difficult this last couple of years is I have family in Israel and family in Europe. And many people here have when you express a desire to hold both sides or understand both perspectives, I have found people saying you can't excuse the Israelis. You have to focus on Gaza. That's if you're not reading the right stuff. When I talk to family in Israel, they say all you're seeing are pictures of dead kids in Gaza. You don't experience what we see. You're not reading the right stuff. Same thing in Europe. And so, the effort to find out different perspectives and different sources of information has been one of the hardest things I've found over the last 2 years to get a sense of what's going on. How do you respond to, you live there, but how do you respond to people who, live here or elsewhere about you don't understand our experience, you're not reading or talking to the right people?
Well, as I said before, when someone asks me what side I'm on, I tell them I'm on both sides. I'm an Israeli, and I have never called Israel a Jewish state. It's not a Jewish state. It's a democratic state that has a majority of Jews. And until, this is one of the hardest things for Israelis to get, is that we will not be safe as long as the Palestinians are not safe. But what you're raising is the challenge we're all facing, which is both and. There are two narratives here, and we can contain them. We're big enough to contain them. There's lots of suffering on both sides. One of my favorite activists who recently died, Joanna Macy is her name, and someone asked her, how can you contain all of this suffering? And she said, if you let it in and dam it like a dam, it will burst. You cannot do that. But her image was, let it in like a stream, and then let the stream pass through you, so that you don't deny all of this pain, but you also don't clutch onto it. You allow it to go. And I think that's somewhere in the vicinity of being able to understand fully the pain and difficulty of being an Israeli soldier, and an Israeli family, and also to really see the reality of the Palestinians. And I just don't, I don't understand, and it's hard for me to accept the fleeing from looking for the Israelis' refusal, a big majority of Israelis' refusal to recognize the suffering in Gaza. It's just, right here. And but it's possible. It's possible. Human hearts are extremely resilient, and we can handle contradictory. And I think that the challenge for you, for all of us, is refusing to have things oversimplified. Things are complicated, and you can make a case for the Palestinian who lives in a refugee camp on the one hand, and for the Israeli who's just trying to get through the week. And there's no competition for who's suffering more, and so that's all I can say. Yeah.
Thank you very much. You've answered at least some of my question. One question, I have two. One question is the friend who is going between the Israel and Hamas, was that Gershon Bastin?
Yeah.
I thought maybe.
Yeah.
I took my daughter over to Israel from Jordan for her 21st birthday and had a meeting with him and her. I now realize that office was being bugged by both sides, so that she could see that, the breadth of Israeli action. But and I want to say it's been inspiring to me to hear you talk about staying in connection and courageous dialogue, because after I'm a social worker, my first year social work supervisor made Aliyah many years ago. She's now living in, and I don't know quite what to say here, but the occupied territories, the West Bank and Judea Samaria, I know it's spoken of many ways here. After the 7-Day War, she was sending me things from Fox News and clearly no mention that Israel was bombing in the south, even while of Gaza, while saying, go to Gaza, the south, it's safe. So I'm thinking about, do I have the courage to reopen conversation with her? So I'm feeling inspired. But my question is more to do with how to deal with the young people. I look around here. I don't know what the average age is here. On Sunday, I went to a Standing Together meeting. I think there was nobody there under, I don't know, would you say 70? But not many. And I have a daughter who's Jewish, a son-in-law who's going to convert. And it's how do we help them with their tremendous distress? I mean, I've got enough to deal with, but I want to help them too when they're not here.
Thank you. It's a challenge. Getting the young people into our Palestinian-Israeli dialogues is also a challenge for us. What is it that would make us more attractive to young people? I have no easy answers. We're struggling with the same thing. Young people, some of my favorite children are young people, and I just I'm competing with my daughter's cell phone, and I don't know. I'm as baffled as you are. I think it's not a losing battle. The Palestinian teenagers really, they object vocally to the fact that we bring in, they come willingly. They get on a bus and they come to a gathering where they're in their late teens and early 20s, and everyone of the Israelis greeting them are 50, 60, or 70 years old. And it's rough, but I think it's a huge challenge. And for Americans, I know it's going to sound very simplistic, but young people have to come. Young people, if we want them to deal with the issues, they have to experience Israel firsthand. And if it's birthright for 10 days on the bus and off the bus, I don't like that tour, but it's better than nothing. There are great programs. There's a 4-month program called Solidarity of Nations, where they live in a commune and they work in a human rights organization, and they study curriculum, a progressive curriculum 2 days a week. There are some wonderful programs. So I think the way to ignite young people is to get them on one of these programs and get them over there. And if you do, Debra knows how to get in touch with me. I will commit myself to meeting them and saying hello and inviting them over for a cup of coffee, and, you know, trying to make them feel at home, point them in the right direction. Dilemma.
Like many, I was taken with so much of what you had to say. I was also struck particularly with your remarks about vulnerability. And while it can produce humility, it can also produce aggression. My question is to put you in an imaginative situation that you were the supreme commander. What would your policy have been on October 8th?
We were united in Israel for the first 2 weeks of the war. I felt, everyone felt, that we had to strike back. And that's what we did.
What kind of striking back would you have advised?
Well, I'm an armchair general. I mean, I don't profess. The horrifying thing about our reaction is the indiscriminate bombing, and the bombing that if I identify an officer in Hamas, I'm willing to kill 25 other people who live in the same apartment complex in order to get to him. That's unacceptable. But all of Israel felt immediately that we had to strike back for 2 weeks, perhaps. And then we needed to take some deep breaths and ask ourselves where this is all going. And that's the last thing that Netanyahu wanted, was for us to think things through, because the war has served his interests. And he was interested in escalation. And if the babysitters in the American government don't control him, he will destroy the present ceasefire. He'll find a way. So, you know, as I say, I went to war in Lebanon in '82. My kids have all been in the army. I believe in a strong army, and we had to respond to this savage attack on us on the 7th of October. But 2 weeks is not 2 years. And the war has dragged on, and thousands and thousands of people have been killed unnecessarily. I feel most pity today for the parents of soldiers who know that their sons are being used in someone else's agenda. But there's something about Israel that when you are committed to the guys you're in the army with, that's first priority. And you only think about things later on. It happened to me. when I realized that what we were doing in Lebanon in '82 was wrong, I thought of throwing down my gun and going to jail. And it would have meant abandoning the guys I'd been doing reserve duty with for years. And that's much stronger than anything else in Israel. So,
do you think that the way that Israel responded on October 8th and thereafter will have lasting and deep and lasting effects, negative effects on the Palestinian population?
well, the 2-year war will have deep and lasting effect. Absolutely. If you destroy 90% of the homes in Gaza, we've left them with a 30-year job of cleaning up the mess we created.
30, perhaps optimistic. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Hi.
Thank you, first of all. I have a question and a dilemma, if I can get two things in here. One, just because just before I left, I just saw the latest headline about settlers attacking folks in the West Bank. And it made me wonder what's the current statistics about what percentage of the Israeli population supports the violence by settlers against people in the West Bank.
Yeah. Statistics, is not my strong suit, but I can tell you that in the same way that many Israelis are turning a blind eye to what we've been doing in Gaza, the same Israelis are turning a blind eye to what's happening in the West Bank. There's a fury and a sort of limitless need for revenge that if we're tearing up Palestinian villages, and this is the olive harvest, it's the most painful thing to see 300-year-old olive trees being burned and torn down by settler thugs, basically. And they're getting a quiet nod. And of course, our police minister is Itamar Ben-Gvir, who the only good Arab is a dead Arab as far as he's concerned. So we have a terrible, terrible situation there. And it's not going to change until we remove these people from office and replace them with decent, as decent as a politician can be. There are some. And
I guess I was asking because I know they're certainly obviously in the extreme right wing, kill all Arabs camp, but wondering if that's really the state of the rest, the average Israeli. Is there such a thing as right wing? Is it everybody?
No, there's avoidance. It's not enthusiastic support, but people just, they turn the page in the newspapers and when I say that to people, or I ask them how they could be ignoring what's going on, they'll say, I can't get over October 7th. What do you want from me? It's too much. And, and it's not Israel at its best, that's for sure.
All right, I'm sorry. And the dilemma comes from the fact that I have family in Israel, and including my beloved eldest nephew, who's now a rabbi there. And I wrote my family, I held back, and then I've written a couple of times about saying my heart's breaking, or talking about the vision my dad had about Israel, or trying to appeal to something or other. And we had some nice conversations, but at the end, even my rabbi nephew said something, made some comment that gets to kind of what you're saying about, yeah, but they look at life differently than we do. It's the dehumanizing. The title of your talk was about remaining human. And maybe that's the point of what you're saying. How do we get people who have lost sight of the humanity of others to recognize that and be open to it? And I hope that doesn't sound like I wasn't listening to everything you said, but, just, I thought of writing after that, and then things got even worse there, so.
It's such a great question, though, this issue of how to rehumanize after we've dehumanized, how to rehumanize the dialogue and to get people to take a look. And, you know, the minute someone who has never sat in a room with a Palestinian and had a conversation, the minute that happens, their perspective changes. They suddenly see someone who has the same kinds of concerns that they have for their family, and it's different. The trouble is the distance and the alienation that so many Israelis have never sat in a room with a Palestinian, and they might pass them on the street, but to actually sit down and talk, and or to learn Arabic so that they can talk, and that's the contact. Contact is going to make the difference, and to rehumanize people, and to maybe also to use like metaphors. I mean, to show someone a picture of a Palestinian mother and her child, and then to see a picture of this person with her child, and to ask her, what's the difference? What do you, why is there a difference?
Oh, thanks. I know there's other people.
I,
We're going to allow Rachel for the last question. I'm sorry, but we're running out of time.
Okay, then I'll give you an easy one. One of the hard conversations that has been happening here in the American diaspora is around the legitimacy of the state at all, and anti-Zionism as a viable option. I hear deeply your love for Israel, and so I think how do you address people who come to the conclusion that Israel shouldn't be a thing, and maybe that's the solution?
shouldn't be a thing.
Yeah, like people who don't believe that the state of Israel should exist.
So what should we do with 10 million people who live in Israel?
I have no idea.
What do
but
they
I don't.
say?
I don't feel that way.
No, but what are they saying?
I don't think they go that far. It doesn't seem to be a coherent thought to me. But this is something that is that I've experienced in conversation over and over for the last 2 years in particular.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
to me,
yeah.
it feels like a very anti-Semitic way to approach a very complex situation. But that's not how it's often couched, or I don't know. I just,
No,
how do you
it's-
talk to somebody who
no,
thinks
thank
that
you.
they shouldn't be?
I'm glad. I wish I could get my hands on some more anti-Zionists. I'm not calling you an anti-Zionist.
I'm definitely not.
It's
I'm
not a
proud
name
Zionist.
calling thing. Yeah, well,
I'm gonna
I'll tell
take
you
my
what.
answer from my
I'll
seat
tell you
now.
what kind of, I'll tell you what kind of Zionist I am. I'm what Vivian Silver was a wonderful peace activist, one of the founders of Women Ways of Peace, and was targeted by Hamas on October 7th in her kibbutz and was murdered. And her sons have continued her struggle. And Vivian, I worked with her, and she used to say, I'm a conditional Zionist, which means there must be a home for the Jews, and it's only legitimate if the same rights that the Jews have in Israel are the rights that the Palestinians will have. And that's the kind of Zionist I am. I don't see how you could square what you want for the Jews in Israel without wanting the same thing for anyone who lives in our country. But Israel should not be a thing, or Israel should not exist, or, I mean, that is easy pickings for friendly undermining of their assumptions. I mean, so where am I, shall we get some cattle cars and ship 10 million people? I mean, what do you suggest? You know, and sometimes humor, by the way, works. Getting people to laugh at their own ridiculous statements is useful. But, you know, and it's easy for me to give advice and then go back to Israel, but I think one of your most important missions is distinguishing between anti-Israeli policy and anti-Semitism. It's like apples and oranges. You hate Jews, say you hate Jews and you're anti-Semitic, that's fine. I mean, it's not fine, but at least you're being straight. But don't mix them up. Israel is a country, it has policies. You might not like the policies, But the people of Israel don't deserve to die any more than the people of any other place deserve to die. And, and be stalwart in insisting that anti-Semitism and anti-Israel, even anti-Zionism is okay with me, because it's an ideology, and you might not accept the ideology that the Jews deserve a home to protect themselves in. But okay, that's all right. But Jew hatred has no place in this discussion. And don't let people slop over into that kind of thing. Thank you all for your listening, and really appreciate it.
Not completely done. We're not completely done. We would like our two co-chairs, Keren and Sherry, will conclude the program. I don't think I would like this. I'm Keren Sammett, Keren Flashman, and we have been working for some time.
So tonight's talk with Yoav really tops the bill here in so many ways. And I think because you brought us to this place of other talks that we've had where we've been trying to cross a divide, talk about the humanity here across peoples and across divisions and differences, very deep differences. So we really are so happy that you could be here, and we really want to appreciate Debra's connection and yes, encouragement. And Lenny, who really working with Debra brought this to light tonight. So we are hoping that tonight's conversation, and thank you, by the way, for all the people who came across the divide over the bridge or whatever from Newton and beyond, and that hopefully our sister congregations, for those who are from Dershay, we will continue to look to do joint programming. And for those of you from other connections, we're so glad you could be here tonight. So we are hoping our IPPC committee will have such a wonderful jump off from this conversation tonight that we will bring you future programming and really to emphasize what you have talked tonight about, and that is conversation. Conversation where we can sit across from each other with differing opinions, differing vantage points, different family experiences and historical experiences that really bring us to the place where we are right now. And also to really look at how we can engage more with young people, because that is something that is pointed out here tonight. I'm going to pass this to Sherry to see if there's anything more.
I think Keren covered it pretty much, but we're talking about trying to have a next conversation in December. Nothing is set in stone, but we thought it would be without an outside speaker, based on some article or a podcast, something we might listen to together for having exchange among congregants. And we know this kind of program is really fabulous to have insights and teachings and from experience, people doing incredible work. And it's also another experience for us to try to talk across and through some of our own differences and divides. So watch out for news on that. We hope to do that in December if we can make it happen before the holidays. Thank you. Thank you so much.